Good evening, and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This is our second in a series of 6 on Unity, the Inside Story. If you have any difficulties in viewing or hearing the broadcast, email mark@truthunity.net. And in a while, you can write down the phone number now, but I will repeat it later, 816-301-6304. That is the number here that you can call if you have any comments or any questions. And so as we begin our time together, I invite you to find a comfortable place in your seat and close your eyes. Become still. Be still and know that the I of you is the very presence of God. That wherever you are, God is because you are there. That source, the infinite source of all good, is within us, ready for our claiming. Whatever it is that you may need, require, or desire, is present right where you are. Guidance, healing, abundance, creative ideas, harmony. And so for a few moments in the silence, whatever it is that you may need, require, or desire, ask in the silence. ask, and you shall receive. And as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we silently affirm, I have free and open access to God's infinite storehouse of good. And as we return more fully to this time and this place, we give thanks for the awareness that all that God is and has is ours for the claiming. And in an awareness of the truth that sets us free, we are so grateful, and we do give thanks in the name and through the power of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay. And so, picking up from where we left off last week, just as a reminder, we talked about the experience in the silence, the foundational experience that produced the global healing ministry. Welcome. And that experience is what began this global enterprise that we know as unity. And I feel that it's extremely important that when you're sitting in a unity church on Sunday morning, that you know why it is that you're there. Now, once Myrtle had the experience, she was a mystic. She had a mystical experience from childhood on. And she wrote this very powerful statement as a way of trying to communicate that experience with all, because it's very natural that you want to share a profound spiritual experience. And she wrote this: "This is the only way to know God." Pretty powerful, yes? "Be still and know that I am God." The I of you is God in you. God in his holy temple, it's in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. That's from Habakkuk 2:20. She said, she described her experience as the sweetest blessing that Christ brings us in the Sabbath of our soul. And that's modeled, of course, on the seventh day of creation. That is in Genesis. That day of silence in which all the work takes place, that brings forth into manifestation whatever it is that we have had in mind. And then she said, "The peace of God that passeth understanding, a quietness and confidence which is the source of all strength, a sweet peace which nothing can offend, a deep rest which the world can neither give nor take away." Now, that is one powerful statement. And in other places, as you know from the booklets that we talked about last week, she said in How I Found Health that this wonderful truth has meant everything to me. It was for her life. You remember she was, doomed to die in 3 months according to the doctors. And that she was ready soil to receive that new truth that penetrated her soul so deeply that she never turned back. And she was never ill again. And when she made her transition, it was by choice. Now, that is a powerful level of consciousness. So that's Myrtle. Now, Charles, a slightly different experience because he had this great tenacity, and he would sit there trying to will his way into the silence, and nothing happened for, I think, 4 months. And then he had some dreams. And in these dreams, it was revealed to him the work that he was to do in Kansas City. Very clear dreams, and he interpreted that as a response to his desire to get information from headquarters. He called going within headquarters. And once those dreams began to happen, then he took this practice more seriously, and much to my surprise, I discovered where it was he found what he called the easiest way to enter into the silence. He described, and I'm going to describe it to you because it's the missing piece for me that I've been looking for a long time. And he said that this was what as he called them, the adepts, meaning the sages of ancient times, used. And he said it was based on this principle of non-resistance, that it was completely effortless, which is why he decided that would be the way he would choose. And wouldn't we all? Because he'd been having a difficult time. And he said they had mantras. So I wanted to describe to you what a mantra is. It is an instrument of the mind. An instrument of the mind. And the mantras that he talked about were called seed mantras. This is unbelievable to me because I realize I've been teaching this for almost 40 years, right? Seed mantras. And the purpose of the mantra is to facilitate, don't know how well you can see it, to facilitate the rapid transcendence from the surface to the depth. Why does
Is that his graphic?
No, this is my graphic. This is my graphic. He only described it. All right. And so he said, well, every unity source says that the mind is like an ocean. And that is true in a lot of ways. And we can stick our toes in the water. We can go up into our knees in the water. We can be like the first man into the Red Sea, Nahshon ben Aminadab, who it was up to his nostrils before the Red Sea parted. We can dive to the depths. It all depends at what depth and at what speed you want to take this journey. But we're all scheduled to take it. But it's your choice as to how fast and how comfortable. And so what Charles discovered was that the mantras, and this was something that I had cognized on my own, were all variations of the I am. The mantra is not a word in the sense that we use words. It is a frequency, and that frequency resonates with the source, which is why the mind is attracted to go there. He discovered this in all of his many, many, many studies, and I found this in a Unity magazine, 1921. Now, he also had an experience of the silence, and it's quite obvious that he did have an experience. And he said this. that all manifestations of life, that is, everything that is formed, comes from that unformed realm. It is the source of all creation. He recognized that. And I'm looking here for what Charles said. This is still Myrtle. I'll read this in a minute. And he said, here's what truth is. And that the whole purpose of meditation is to come to know who and what you are. That is the whole purpose of the meditation. But then we have to bring it forth. And he said, he says this, he says, truth is not the formulated doctrine of any church, nor the creed of any sect. That truth is written in the inner sanctuary of every soul, and all know it without external formulas. It is the intuitive perception of what is true of God and of man. All right, that is truth, and he's referring here to the covenant in Jeremiah 31:33, that I will write the law upon your inward parts. The Israelites had a very hard time obeying the law in a literal and outer way. And so with Jeremiah, the fifth covenant of the Old Testament, it's in here. And it's up to you if you want to live by it. It's your responsibility now. Okay. And so he says, but we all have a work to do. You don't just meditate to have a wonderful, unbounded experience. He said, we all have a work to do. Do you even know what it is? Many don't. And it's not so much what the work is in a literal sense of the word, but it can either be to you a job, or it could be a career, or it could be a calling. Okay, and I've experienced what a calling is, because there was a point when I had to go to that teacher training course. I had to do it. There was no other option for me. It wasn't that I thought, let's see, can I make a living doing this? Or, gee, maybe I ought to try doing some office work. No. Okay. And it's true of ministry as well. Some people treat ministry as a job. And I know a couple of people in my class who treat it as a calling. You know, it's something you are called to do. Now, it may not be work in the ordinary sense at all. Perhaps you are called to a particular situation because your qualities are needed there. Maybe it is your patience or your kindness or your compassion that is yours to uplift yourself and the world with. Work is something that you need to love. You need to do what you love, because if you're going into the silence and you have access to all this fullness, you need to bring it forth in love to serve everyone that you encounter. So there's a whole article on the value of work that Charles wrote. It also has another function, which is to integrate and to stabilize the truths in meditation that come up for you. And then when you apply those truths, they become a part of you. So meditation first, and then you apply it to whatever your particular realm of, I don't know if I should say expertise, or whatever field you enjoy working in. And that brings fulfillment to you, and it serves to uplift the entire environment to its highest good. So now, always the difficulty is with spiritual experience is that we try to communicate it to other people. Moses had this difficulty. Jesus had this difficulty. Jesus said, in Jesus' time, it was believed that you had to go through a priest to get to God. And some people still believe that. And Jesus said, no. We all have equal access to God, and that is within us. We all have. Well, that was very threatening to the religious authorities of his time. And he said, look, it's like this, Abba, and he would address God directly in a very intimate way, Abba, and that means daddy. It's like we would say daddy. And the secret of Jesus' success was that he identified with the source within him. And so he could say, the Father and I are one. All right. Myrtle knew that truth. Okay, so it's better expressed in poetry and in allegory than in any other way, but in ordinary prose, I challenge you to take an ineffable experience and try to communicate it to someone. At best, you can inspire them to want that experience, but you cannot give the experience to them. As much as the Fillmores wanted to communicate that experience, and we're going to talk about some of the ways that they tried to communicate that experience, and they certainly did spread the word through everything that they did, but it does not give everyone that experience. We cannot coast on the laurels of our past. We each have to do that work for ourselves. So what Charles did was, once he had the experience himself, he was on a mission. And he did not stop. He was geared into action. And he says that we ought to know that that purpose in life gives joy and zest to living. To succeed, we must have some great purpose in mind, but above all, we must always purpose in our hearts to achieve spiritually. One and only purpose of man's existence is the development of his soul, and any attainment, whether mental or material, that cannot be associated with and counted as an aid toward that end will ultimately be refused. Myrtle said it quite simply. She said, you not only have to do good and be good, but you have to be good for something. In other words, you can't just say, I'm a good person and think that you're done, you know. Good for something in this world in which we live. The real purpose of your life is to express the creation of God, to unfold the many departments of your mind which God has planned for you and which will enable you to know and do his will. All right, so here's some of the things. The main thrust of unity was through education. And as soon as Charles and Myrtle both had that experience of the source of all, the depth of that experience in the science, they made a covenant, as we talked about last week, dedicating themselves to the Spirit of Truth and expecting nothing in return except knowing that they would be provided for, because every divine idea contains within it the means for its fulfillment. So, while 1886 was the initial experience of Myrtle Fillmore, 1889 was the first publication. And here we have Modern Thought, 1889, Volume 1, Number 1. And as you can see, it's like a newspaper. Talk about local healing, about absent healing. It advertises some books. It's an interesting publication. There's an article on science and religion. So this little newspaper changed names, became Christian Science Thought, but then Mary Baker Eddy objected. She thought she was the only one who could use that. So Charles changed it to Thought, and then finally, coinciding with the beginning of the change of name of Silent Unity, it had been the Society of Silent Help, it became Society of Silent Unity, and Charles said, Unity, that's what we'll call it. And it became the publication through which the healings were reported, through which letters were published that people, or partially published, that people wrote in, and the answers that the department gave for them, so that it became a tool of teaching people about spiritual healing. And so Unity Magazine began, and you can probably read the dates better than I can. I don't know if others can out in the world here. And so I will tell you the dates. And so after Modern Thought, which was 1889, 1893 was We Wisdom. And I know people in my other classes who have grown up with We Wisdom, or whose children grew up with We Wisdom. 1893, and it lasted almost 100 years. We got up to 1991. And that is such a good way to begin to build a support system for the message, because the children, and there are poems and puzzles and music and songs and games and Bible stories and animal stories, and the kids wrote a lot of it. And this one is from February 1939. So welcome to look at any of these. And then the Unity Book Company turned into the Unity Tract Society. This was 1897, because Charles wanted all commercial sense taken away from the book company. All right? Book company implies profit, and that. And so the Unity Tract Society, it's associated with religious tracts, and that there were millions, literally, of them. These little prayer cards that would be sent out, these little booklets that they would send. There was the Silent 70, a group which it was like the missionary arm, where they would give free literature of all kinds to hospitals and prisons. So that's the Unity Book Company. And in 1895, in Unity magazine, Emily Cady, whom you might know, who wrote Lessons in Truth and what are considered Unity classics, was invited to write 12 lessons in practical Christianity. And she was invited because she was very clear, she was very simple, she was easy to understand, and she had a good grasp of spiritual truth. And so one each month of that year was published in Unity magazine. So they got like a whole course in the course of a year with a subscription to Unity magazine. Now, the purpose of Unity magazine: to redeem the whole human race. Okay? Now, when you subscribe to a magazine, I ask you, do you expect that magazine? But Charles had this gift of seeing the extreme possibilities of something, of spiritual knowledge, because silent unity, all right, when 2 or 3 are gathered in the name of the Christ, there the Christ is. So what if this knowledge and silent unities were established everywhere around the world, all sitting in silence together at a particular time, and because the time zones are all different, everyone was praying together in silence at the same time. And so as the group expands, the territory of influence that light has grows. And this is a truth that has been discovered scientifically, that when a certain percentage of people are sitting in the silence, this is a scientific principle, and so we can apply this to sitting in silence because the coherence of the group increases. There was an experiment in 1984, 85, the turn from 84 to 85, and there were 7,000 people gathered together under one roof, all sitting in silence at the same time. For the purpose, well, it wasn't framed as redeeming the whole human race, but it was framed as exerting a positive influence throughout the world. It was very exciting to be part of that, not only in a personal, experiential way, but to every night, as the indicators of quality of life were announced, to hear how things were better in terms of criminal behavior, in terms of hospital admissions, and etc. No, this was in Iowa. That was the very first one. And it turned out that you don't need everyone in the world. You only need the square root of the population which you are attempting to reach to bring about the desired result. Well, they also felt, Charles especially felt, being a businessman, which he was before he gave that up totally to dedicate himself to spreading spiritual truth. Here's this book called Christian Business. And I love this book because it is so not like the way the world does business. It says this. Okay. And why not? Why shouldn't spiritual values be at the basis of business? Why shouldn't it? There's an article here talking about service. If you want to be successful, give the best service. That makes sense to me. You don't try to get your good, at another's expense. If you want to be successful, you don't cut corners. You think about how you can give for your own highest good and for the good of your customers. There are articles about cooperation rather than competition, articles about harmony in the workplace. And, one of the criteria for forming a silent unity group was harmony. You have to be in harmony with the people that you are praying with. And it was the same thing in that experiment where you went in there to sit in silence with all, knowing your oneness. It is only in spirit, at the silence of your being, where we are truly one, where we know our oneness with all that is. Okay, so Christian business, and it went through name changes as well. It became business, and then there was progress and all kinds of things. But there was a total of 7 publications. Probably the latest one was, I had it just a minute ago, a Daily Word. Daily Word, 1924. This is the 90th anniversary of Daily Word. And it was in July that it started. So, this happens to be, 1942. But they have what are called the class thoughts. And so each month there would be an affirmation for guidance, one for healing, one for prosperity, and one for peace. And so Daily Words, that came about because people wanted a little daily manual to remind them of how to stay on track. Okay, that's just the publications. Unity was humming. They did all their own printing, all their own publishing. The whole front, downstairs of 913 Tracy was devoted to printing presses and publishing. And in the silent unity, in the silent movie, you can see how they were like busy bees working to get all these publications, all these subscriptions. And I'll quote you a few statistics. The Lessons in Truth I was telling you about that was published in Unity magazine, a course of 12 lessons in practical Christianity, which in book form became Lessons in Truth, a bestseller, and was translated into several languages, and over 1.6 million copies were printed. The number of tracts, those would be the prayer cards that I was telling you about. Between 1915 and 1917, 1,478,250 of these affirmations that would be sent out in letters. And in 1923, 3 million tracts. Okay. In 1909, I didn't mention Weekly Unity. This was even more popular than Unity magazine, and that was the news of the local healing ministry. These were the people who came down to 9th and Tracy to meet one-on-one with Myrtle and her 11 practitioners, and the hundreds that would line the halls on Sunday morning. I still think of that as I look out over a mostly empty auditorium. And so Weekly Unity, and Lowell Fillmore was the editor of Weekly Unity. It had a greater circulation with over 100,000 by 1920. There was an article in Christian Business by Retta Chilcott James Dillett Freeman said that Retta Chilcott ruled silent unity with an iron fist. And she wrote this article on give good service. That was the one. There was a magazine called Youth that was the successor to We Wisdom, so when the kids outgrew that. And then we have all of these books. Now these are all of the books that Charles wrote. Starting with Christian Healing in 1909. A lot of them were essays that were put together in transcripts of talks, 1926, 1930. Prosperity was actually a book, I understand, and so on. Here's a whole list of them. A couple of them were put together after his passing in 1948. Myrtle wrote one book as a book, We Wisdom's Way. And then, because she wrote so many hundreds of letters, there is a book called Healing Letters, but in the archives you will find thousands of them. And then Cora, who was Charles' second wife, Christ enthroned in man, and teach us to pray. So that is for a man without formal education, I would say. That's kind of a large output, and he's brilliant, a brilliant mind, and very articulate. But that's just the publications. So then we start with the various schools. July 1896, the first class on practical Christianity, followed by practical Christianity and Christian healing. Always part of the class was how to demonstrate healing. This is an integral part of Unity from the beginning. Charles and Myrtle taught those classes. And then between 1902 and 1909, they had what was called the advanced course, plus the primary course of the 12 lessons. And it was open to the public, but the emphasis was again on healing. In every class, they had a practical demonstration where someone in the class would ask for healing, and then the class would demonstrate how much they had actually learned, and they would affirm truths for that person, pretty much like we do still today, although it's not part of any class that I know of. Then we had the correspondence school, which began in 1909. As people from outside of Kansas City began to hear about the classes, they wanted to participate. We did not have an internet then, and so they would be sent lessons by mail, and they were to read. They could only do one lesson per month, and they had to read it thoroughly until they understood it and could know the points and present them in their own words. Then they would send the text back, and they would receive the questions, and the questions had to be answered satisfactorily. This was for everyone who had any association with Unity. This was not the training school for certification in teaching. This was everyone who had any work at Unity to be fluent in metaphysics and Bible and to know Unity history. That was the correspondence school. And the material, while the language is in some cases archaic, the knowledge of it is profound. I put the lessons on my website just so if people wanted to have a look at the kind of depth that the education offered at that time. It's a very good example. There was Series 1, Series 2. So you got all the truth about prayer, the truth about healing, the truth about prosperity, and there was lessons in truth, and then there was how I use truth, and possibly a few more. And so people took these. The local classes were pretty much on the format. It sounds like to me it's when we used to take CEP classes, where they would have intense classes for 2 weeks, and then get credits as a result of that. Then, and everyone had to get a passing grade if you wanted to continue to work at Unity. So there was a high standard. And they said they wanted all students to develop into teachers and healers so they could minister to their own families and to those in their communities. If you do not understand truth well enough to demonstrate it, you will find these lessons very helpful. Okay. Now, the training school. I have a manual from the 1940 training school. This is for those who, in addition, wanted to become teachers out in the field. And they were not called churches out there, but the idea was to send qualified teachers out to the field and start Unity Centers. Unity Centers of Truth. My first Unity church was the Unity Center of Truth in the nation's capital. And that was where my first Unity minister, when he found out that I taught classes in silent meditation, he listened to what I was teaching and said, "You have to teach them to meditate. They don't want to, and they need to learn." That worked until his board interfered. So here's the training school, and there were 6 semesters, and it's all the courses that you're familiar with in this format. First term, Jesus Christ Heals, Intelligent Study of the Bible, that's metaphysical, Sermon on the Mount, Discipline, Bible Interpretation, Lessons in Truth, Prayer. Second term, Mysteries of Genesis, Christian Healing, all. And this goes on for these terms. And then at the end, there's a test. 700 questions answered their way. In other words, you couldn't just make up stuff. All right. So the training school, and already before then, Myrtle never wanted ordination. Because when she and Charles were ordained by Emma Curtis Hopkins, they had to already demonstrate healing, casting out demons, raising the dead, all the commission that Jesus gave us to do the greater works. They had to demonstrate it. And so in the commencement address, she said, "You have been tried and not found wanting. You can do all these things. You can preach truth. You have demonstrated truth." And so they were ordained as Christian Science ministers in 1891. Charles and Myrtle then ordained one another in unity. That's how that took place. But Myrtle was not in favor of ordaining people whom she believed were not ready, and they did not themselves use titles. They felt the titles separated, and sometimes for legal reasons they used Reverend, but most of the time they were Mother Myrtle and Papa Charlie, and they would sit there and work right alongside others. And if there was insufficient cash for the payroll, the workers got paid first. And they had great faith knowing that whatever they needed was going to be provided. So they were quite firm in their commitment and in their conviction. Imagine what the world would look like if all that had taken place. And so, let's see, where are we getting to be here? We're almost to 8 o'clock. And here we have the order of things. The leader's total preparation was this: a completed correspondence course, a completed methods and ideals within the next 2 years. The methods and ideals are the standard of teaching that was expected of those sent out to the field. And that is something indeed to read, because in every section, from the teaching to the finances to the ethics, to the administration, in every field there are 6 booklets. It is designed to be according to spiritual principle in every single area. I'm going to spend more time on the lesson, the methods and ideals in another time, but it's quite a remarkable document. And in my experience, most ministers have not been acquainted with that, let alone with the statement of faith that Charles and Myrtle put together. So methods and ideals. Then an established ministry consistent with the Unity School standards and methods of presenting the teaching, and according to center conduct. Platform only, get this, platform open only to Unity speakers. Center program shall include regular course of study of fundamentals, Unity textbooks, and the Bible. Quarterly reports sent regularly to the field department. Satisfactory rating, fewer than half received a 3-star rating. As soon as Myrtle passed in 1931, ordination began, and as that happened, more and more complaints would come in saying that Unity was not teaching unity. And they were saying, what to do about this? And the reply would be, we don't interfere with the autonomy of a center, but if they're not teaching unity, they cannot use the name Unity. And so it gives you an insight into the standards that they wanted maintained. Now, they knew that truth, and truth with a capital T, meaning the non-changing eternal reality, all right, that is spiritual law, is truth. That which is true of God, that which is true of all of us, we're all spiritual beings. That is not something that will change. As Charles was fond of saying, we do not have a tricky God. God is always the same today, 10,000 years ago, and wherever. That is eternal truth, that we are spiritual beings. That eternal truth is contained in Mark 1:15, where Jesus says, the time is fulfilled. That means right now. the kingdom of God is at hand. The kingdom of God's right here, right now. Repent, that is, rethink, turn within, turn around, and rejoice in the good news. The good news is that that kingdom of God is within us, and that is the source of all. And that's the gospel that they were trying to spread. And once we have that experience, we are able to do the greater works, all the things that Jesus promised. So it's, when you think big, and Charles had that gift of thinking in the ultimate. What is the ultimate possibility of this silent unity group? And he was utterly prophetic, saying that in these groups he could see a time when the entire, he called it Christian, but by Christian he meant those who knew the Christ, that were in the Christ consciousness. This would be the invisible church of Christ. That would be the connecting link to the churches. All right, so that is what, just as the silence has to do with your own enlightenment, your own fulfillment, so too these groups have to do with the fulfillment of the entire world. He saw that as a revelation, and he said in 1924, there will be, when this happens, a great commotion in the world. I ask you, what are we seeing today? And where is God? God is present. Because when truth is introduced into an impure nervous system, into an impure collective, there's this phenomenon that we have called chemicalization or purification, and it is very intense if people are not spiritually prepared to take care of that. It all began with Jesus, who had a laser beam consciousness that was able to penetrate all the layers and layers and layers of limitation around the globe. He pierced through that. It's like he poked a hole into the next dimension, and light has been coming in. And when there is light introduced into an impure nervous system, there is turmoil. All right, and that's good because it demonstrates that the way is being cleared. It reminds me of the John the Baptist story, preparing the way of the Lord, and they used the roads as garbage dumps, and so when they heard that somebody important was coming, like the king or some important official, they would have to quick go clean up the garbage out of the roads and make way. And so Jesus used these analogies. Jesus had to teach. He taught through precepts. He taught through analogies or parables. Because you can't communicate that experience. It's like this. The kingdom of God is like a pearl of great price. It's like a treasure that's been buried in a field, and that you would sell everything you had to own that field. It's like a little bit of leaven, where a little hidden in the flour, which leavens which expands. So, and the disciples still didn't get it. And so he thought, well, maybe demonstrating the truth. Here's what you can do when you are able to tap into that. And And you know, all the things that we call miracles that Jesus was able to do. It's just simply knowing how the law works, as in mind, so in manifestation. And so he did that. And then that didn't work either. And so he used himself as the example to demonstrate that absolutely anything could be overcome. And the Fillmores totally believed that any challenge, there is nothing more powerful than the power and presence of God within you. Let's see, what time are we getting to be? And it is 8 o'clock, and as traditional, I will invite you out there, if you have any comments or questions, to please call in 816-301-6304. You can also email me at reveleanor@gmail.com or newfoundation.org. Yeah, okay.
I'm always fascinated about the idea of ordination.
Yes.
Who ordains whom and
Yes.
what it is. When they were ordained by Mary Baker Eddy.
No,
by
Emma Curtis
Emma
Hopkins.
Curtis Hopkins, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They were ordained by her. They had to demonstrate.
Go ahead.
They had to demonstrate raising the dead.
Good evening. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? You have a question or a comment?
I do have two questions. And if you covered this earlier in your broadcast, I apologize. I was a little late tuning in. Can you tell me when it happened that silent unity became a 24/7 operation? I presume this would have been after the time that they added the telephone.
Yes.
And the other question I had was from, I think your lesson 2 days ago. You mentioned that when Myrtle was working for the 2-year period of time that she spent treating for her illness, that she had an empty chair.
Yes.
That he had set aside for Jesus. And I'd be interested in how you sourced that. I had never heard that before, and that's very fascinating to me.
I got that particular fact. Well, I sourced it from 2 books. One was Neil Vala, Torchbearer to Light the Way. And I believe the other one was Myrtle Fillmore, Mother of Unity. Yes, the empty chair was there for Jesus, who represented the Christ to her. Now, when the telephone came in answer to your other question, it has always been a 24-hour ministry. There was a man by name of Mr. Drake. When the telephone first came, it was 1907, and he was the only paid to pray worker in Silent Unity, and he had a place, a rocking chair, and he would do that, and that there was one person on the phone who managed the phone all night. The rest of the daytime workers, and there were 500 of them, some were letter writers, some were the ones who kept the file, the people who filed and who sent out the subscriptions and did various tasks around Unity, but it was called the Silent Unity Department. All the letter writing, and you had to start small. You had to start by being a file clerk. You didn't get to write letters and answer the phone right away. And up until I think the 1980s, not sure about that exactly, but but for sure up until the 1980s, the whole day was structured differently for those who worked at Silent Unity. They had 3 prayer vigil sessions of a half hour each, because it was felt that the ones who were praying needed to stay uplifted from listening to, people's difficulties all day long. And they even, in addition to that, they took time out in the morning when the mail came in, to bless the mail. They took time out at noon for a prosperity meditation. They had 3 regular prayer meetings at, I believe it was 10, 3, and 5. And then the nighttime person, when the whole operation for Silent Unity moved next door to 917, Silent Unity was on the 5th floor, and it was closed to the public. And that is not something that is true today. The public is invited. I worked at Silent Unity for 7 years, and there were visitors that were being shown around and everything. It was a completely private meeting for the workers so that they could be uplifted. And that is shown as early as 1926, but it went on, from the beginning, when they had people on the phone, and when they had people just writing letters. So as soon as the phone came in, it was a 24-hour thing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your ministry.
You're very welcome. Thanks for calling in. Okay. So, Dean, about raising the dead, there was a question here about, because Jesus said to raise the dead. Now, the Fillmores knew that behind every statement is a spiritual principle. Words are simply symbols, and we can't take them for the thing itself. Just like I can say, here's a map of Hawaii. And you can say, oh, this is Hawaii. No, it's not Hawaii. All right, it's a map of Hawaii. And like that, the words in the Bible are. And so what's the principle behind raising the dead? That the old has to die before the new can come in. So we have to let go of all of our cherished beliefs, all of the old relationships that aren't working, all of those things that we are very attached to, if we want to open the way for a new level of consciousness to come in. And that's hard. Change is hard for most people. I've often asked myself, could I walk up to a dead body and say, but Myrtle would tell, I right away, she was able to say to someone, put down those crutches and get up and walk. And he did. Some years later, when Lowell, he had been a child of 3, 4, 5, something like that, when Myrtle first was healing from tuberculosis, and a man came. It was a salesman who came and said he had a son about Lowell's age, and he was blind. And he had this notion that there are things that can't change, there are things that cannot be healed, and people are very attached to this, and I've had people say to me, it can't change. That's just the way it is. That's just the way I am. Well, she said, would you like me to pray with this boy? And of course, children are more open and receptive. And so, many years later, and he was healed, and many years later, when he had grown up, he saw Lowell and I guess a horse and buggy, and said, "Oh, you probably don't remember me, but your mother healed my eyes." Of course, Myrtle would say it was the Holy Spirit working in and through me. And so, raising the dead, we have examples, a number of examples, Mrs. Takata being one of them, if you recall the story. Mrs. Takata, who lived in Hawaii and whose neighbor had just passed, and her daughter was very emotionally distraught, came over and asked Mrs. Takata to go to the funeral with her, and she was very emotionally upset. And so when she went, she found this woman stretched out on a table, a coffin, death certificate, the whole thing. And what does she do? She doesn't know what to do in this situation. People are preparing food. She goes, puts her hands on this woman for like 45 minutes. And pretty soon she saw the woman's eyes blinking. And so she quick got everything out of the way. So the woman, and then she asked the woman, "Were you sleeping?" And she said, "Yes." And then she described this classic, what we would call a near-death experience. So, and this is out of a Christian tradition. Mrs. Takata was practicing, she was connecting to the source by touching that person. And she wasn't saying anything, she was simply offering energy. And the woman, because the daughter wasn't ready to let her go, the energy gave her what she needed to come back. And we have examples of near-death experiences all the time. So yes, people can be technically killed instantaneously and then come back. And
But did Myrtle and Charles do that?
no, Myrtle.
Spiritually, but not.
Okay, here's the thing. Myrtle was never ill again. She knew the moment. She was enough in tune. Here is the piece that I think people don't get. And that is that one thing we have to factor in is that we are here for a certain purpose, and when that purpose is accomplished, we are free to go. And many people are not aware of what their purpose is, and so they try to stay no matter what. Well, Myrtle was not ill, and she felt, and this is just my sense of things at that time, but it was like at the time when the harmony at Unity was beginning to splinter a little bit. That these people going out in the field, and they heard complaints that, that some people weren't teaching Unity, etc. And she felt, as she said, my work can be done better from the other side. She was not ill. She went home and she passed. It was a choice, and it's a choice we all have. But Myrtle, in my estimation, was extremely evolved beyond most of us. Charles totally believed he would live forever. And theoretically, he is right, because if you are always connected to the source of life within you, what is it that can destroy you? All right, if you're always connected to the source, what's more powerful than the source of life? But he was sure that he was going to regenerate and live forever in that body. However, he knew towards the end that it wasn't going to happen this time. And he also knew something which I think is interesting. He also knew that the organization that he had built would not last. But he said not to worry, because as long as the vision was still alive in the consciousness of some, those eternal truths will never die. But the banner under which they stand could change. And of course, we want that to be unity. I'm rather attached to that name because it's so descriptive. But whoever has a consciousness to hold the truths that unity stand for, that's where unity will live. Myrtle, as I talked about in the last class, was unusual in that she came to know that people could simply be in her presence and receive the radiance of her consciousness and be lifted up. And she saw her role as kind of just being the example. Extraordinary. She is awe-inspiring to me, Myrtle Fillmore. And Charles was a giant intellect, a great, gifted organizer who built things. But structures don't last. Jesus did not, his teaching has lasted. But he didn't do anything that most people think they need to do. He didn't write any books. In fact, the only thing Jesus ever did was scribble a few things in the sand, at least from what we see in the Bible. He didn't build any buildings. He did not build a single church. The church he built was the invisible church upon the rock of faith that is spoken of in Matthew. He didn't do any of these achievements that people remember for a time and are forgotten. And yet the teaching, which is eternal, non-changing truth, has lasted for 2,000 plus years. And we're still trying to understand what it all means and how it applies to us and how to plumb the depths of that. And so that's the reason why I started this ministry as a kind of outgrowth of Ninth and Tracy, because I felt that at least the truth of the silence is something that I could contribute, because I had been teaching it for so many years, that's the foundation. And then from that perspective in the silence comes an understanding of what lies behind the words. The Bible. We need the Bible. There was a Bible lesson in every single Sunday lesson. The Bible gives us the understanding of where we are on that spiritual journey. And as I have told those of you who've been in my class, that the people are not people and the places are not places, that they are all parts of a landscape of consciousness, and we know exactly where we are at a certain point in our journey. And it's a certain validation of, oh yeah, that story is about me at a particular point in time. And so that's part of the new foundation. It's the experience in the silence and the understanding that the scriptures give. And then the healing. Okay, then the healing from that. I feel that unity history is extremely important because it is a legacy. And it's not just a legacy for those of us who attend a unity church, because Jesus' prayer was for all to be united in one brotherhood. And that doesn't mean just Christians. It includes all religions. It includes all cultures. And that was the vision of Jesus. And that's where it's headed. but it's just having a lot of global chemicalization along the way. And there's no, at this moment, no organization that can hold that truth. What happens in organizations is when they get to a certain point, they make their own importance more than the message that they're designed to spread. For my part, I feel that the missing link has always been the meditation in the silence. And I feel very fortunate that I learned about that before I went to Unity, because when I went to Unity, I thought, oh, this is a match made in heaven. Anyway, anything else that I'll yak on forever, as you know, but I just wanted to see what anything you had to say. Well, it's 8:22, so I will we'll close, but I'd like to read to you a little bit, if I can find it here. I'd like to read to you a little bit from this, because this poem went to the moon, as you know. It went to the moon. It's on the moon. James Dillett Freeman, I Am There. So if you'd like to close your eyes and just listen to this. Do you need me? I am there. You cannot see me, yet I am the light you see by. You cannot hear me, yet I speak through your voice. You cannot feel me, yet I am the power at work in your hands. I am at work, though you do not understand my ways. I am at work, though you do not recognize my works. I am not strange visions. I am not mysteries. Only in absolute stillness, beyond self, can you know me as I am, and then but as a feeling and a faith. Yet I am there, yet I hear, yet I answer. When you need me, I am there. Even if you deny me, I am there. Even when you feel most alone, I am there. Even in your fears, I am there. Even in your pain, I am there. I am there when you pray and when you do not pray. I am in you and you are in me. Only in your mind can you feel separate from me, for only in your mind are the mists of yours and mine. Yet only with your mind can you know me and experience me. Empty your heart of empty fears. When you get yourself out of the way, I am there. You can of yourself do nothing, but I can do all, and I am in all. Beloved, I am there. And that says a lot. James Dillett Freeman, our poet laureate, and I forget the name of the astronaut who actually took that up there and left it, but it was one of the three that actually walked on the moon. And what a place for it, that God is there on the moon. And so thanks for all of you coming. This is a treat. I haven't had so many right here. Yes, for sure.
Oh, is that
The
one
kitty
thing?
was in. Yeah. She's
Um,
been going, my puss.
yeah. And so If for those of you who would like to make a love offering to New Foundation Unity and support our work, I invite you to take your love offerings in your hands. And as always, we bless our offerings with the awareness that the source is infinite. Infinite substance flowing to, through, and around us. As we give, so we receive. That is the truth that Jesus taught. And God has already given us all his very own Spirit, infinite divine ideas, infinite good. And now, because of that fullness in our hearts, we give freely and with love, knowing that already more good is on its way to us. And as we send our gifts forth, we bless them with our offertory statement: divine love through me blesses and multiplies all the good I give and all the good I receive. And so next week we will continue. We will talk about silent unity in more depth, as well as the other fruits of the ministry, the centers and the schools as they expanded outward. And we will talk about the methods and ideals and how they worked in that environment. And so there's several more classes. The last class we will talk about how we can do something individually and collectively to keep this legacy alive. And so thank you for watching. Blessings.